Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to episode 4 of Storytime with Venus. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope you are enjoying this series. It's definitely one of my favorite projects I've ever decided to create. So today, I'm going to be taking this dirty little thing, this dirty little book, this filthy little thing. So we're going to be reading The Prince and the Pauper by the luxurious Mark Twain. And I'm going to go ahead and read the first and second chapter because the first chapter is extremely short and it's just not quite enough to really sink your teeth into quite yet. So let us journey, shall we? The Birth of the Prince and the Pauper. Classic. In the ancient city of London, on a certain autumn day in the second quarter of the 16th century, a boy was born to a poor family of the name Canty, who did not want him. On the same day, another English child was born to a rich family of the name Tudor, who did want him. All England wanted him. England had so longed for him, and hoped for him, and prayed God for him, that now that he was really to come, the people went nearly mad for joy. Mere acquaintances hugged and kissed each other and cried. Everybody took a holiday, and high and low, rich and poor, feasted and danced and sang and got very mellow, and they kept this up for days and nights together. By day, London was a sight to see, with gay banners waving from every balcony and housetop, and splendid pageants marching along. By night, it was again a sight to see, with its great bonfires at every corner and its troops of revelers making merry around them. There was no talk in all England but of the new baby, Edward Tudor, Prince of Wales, who lay lapped in silks and satins, unconscious of all this fuss, and not knowing, and not caring either. But there was no talk about the other baby, Tom Canty, lapped in his poor rags, except among the family of paupers whom he'd had just come to trouble with his presence. Haven't I felt that before? I'm sure we have all had those moments where we can relate. Tom's Early Life, Chapter 2. Let us skip a number of years. London was 1,500 years old and was a great town for that day. It had 100,000 exhibits, some think double as many. The streets were very narrow and crooked and dirty, especially in the part where Tom Canty lived, which was not far from London Bridge. The houses were wood, and with the second story projecting over the first, and the third sticking out its elbows beyond the second. The higher the houses grew, the broader they grew. They were skeletons of strong crisscross beams with solid material between, coated with plaster. The beams were painted red, blue, and black, according to the owner's taste, and they gave the houses this very picturesque look. The windows were small, glazed with little diamond-shaped panes, and they opened outward on hinges like doors. The house which Tom's father lived in was up a foul little pocket called Offel Court, out of Pudding Lane. It was a small, decayed, and rickety, and it was packed full of wretched poor families. Canty's tribe occupied a room on the third floor. The mother and father had a sort of bedstead in the corner, but Tom, his grandmother, and his two sisters, Bet and Nan, were not restricted. They had all the floor to themselves, and might sleep were they close. There were the remains of a blanket or two and some bundles of ancient and dirty straw, but these could not rightly be called beds, for they were not organized. They were kicked into a general pile in the mornings, and selections made from the mess at night for service. Bet and Nan were 15-year-old twins. They were good-hearted girls, unclothed, clothed in rags, and profoundly ignorant. Their mother was like them, but the father and the grandmother were a couple of fiends. They got drunk whenever they could, and they fought each other and anybody else who came in the way. They cursed and swore, "Ooh, I must be a shanty kind of lady." They cursed and swore, and always drunk or sober. John Canty was a thief, and his mother a beggar. They made beggars of children, but failed to make thieves of them. Among, but not of, the dreadful ramble that inhabited the house was a good old priest, whom the king had turned out of the house, and home with them, right ways secretly. Father Andrew also taught Tom a little Latin and how to read and write, and would have done the same for the girls, but they were afraid of the jeers of their friends, who could not have endured such a queer accomplishment in them. All of Offal Court was such another hive of Canty's house. Drunkenness, riot, brawling, they were in order there. Every night and nearly all night long, broken heads were common as hunger in that place. Yet little Tom was not unhappy. He'd had a hard time of it, but didn't know it. It was sort of time that all the Offal Court boys had, therefore he supposed it was correct and a comfortable thing. Then he came home empty-handed at night. He knew his father would curse him and thrash him first, and that when he was done, the awful grandmother would do it all over again to improve on it, and that way the night he'd be starving. Mother would slip him a stealthy little stealthy with a little miserable scrap of crust that she'd been able to save for him by going hungry herself. Notwithstanding, she was often caught in sort of treason and soundly beaten for it by her husband. No, Tom's life went along enough, especially in summer. He only begged just enough to save himself, for the laws against mediocrity were stringent and the penalties heavy, so he would put a good deal of his time in listening to good Father Andrew's charming old tales and legends about giants and fairies, dwarfs and genies, and enchanted castles, and gorgeous kings and princes. And his head grew to be full of these wonderful things, and many a night he lay in the dark on the scant and offensive straw, tired, hungry, and smarting from a thrashing, and he unleashed his imagination, and soon fought his aches and pains in delicious pictures to himself and soon forgot his aches and pains in delicious picturings to himself of the charmed life a petted prince in regal palace would live. One desire came in time to haunt him day and night. It was to see a real prince with his own eyes. He spoke of it once to some of his Offal Court comrades, but they heard none too of it, I'm sure. Jeered him and scoffed him. 'Tisn't that the way? So unmercifully that he was glad to keep his dreams to himself after that. He often read the priest's old books and got him to explain and enlarge upon them. His dreaming and readings worked certain changes in him, and by his dream people were so fine that they grew to laminate his shabby clothing in his dirt, and to wish to be clean and better clad. he went on playing in the mud just the same and enjoying it too. But instead of splashing around in the theme solely for fun of it, he began to find an added value in it because of the washings and cleanings it afforded. Tom could always find something going on around the Maypole in Cheapside and at the fairs. And now and then he and the rest of London had a chance to see a military parade with some famous unfortunate carried prisoner to the Tower by the land or boat. One summer's day he saw poor Anne Askew and 3 men burned at the stake in Smithfield, and heard an ex-bishop preach a sermon to them which did not interest him. Yes, Tom's life was varied and pleasant enough in the whole, but by and by Tom's reading and dreaming about princely life wrought such a strong side effect upon him that he began to act like a prince. Unconsciously, his speech and manners became curiously ceremonious and courtly, and to the vast admiration and amusement of his intimates. But Tom's influence among these young people began to grow now, day by day, and in the time he came to be looked up to by them with a sort of a wandering awe, as a superior being. He seemed to know so much, and he could do such marvelous things, and withal he was so deep and wise. And Tom's remarks and Tom's performances reported by the boys to the elders, and these also presently began to discuss Tom Canty, and to regard him as the most gifted and extraordinary creature. Full-grown people brought their perplexities to Tom for solution, and were often astonished at the wit and wisdom of his decisions. In fact, he was become a hero to all who knew him except his own family. These only saw nothing of him. Privately, after a while, Tom organized a royal court. He was the prince. His social comrades were guards, chamberlains, equerries, lords and ladies in waiting in the royal family. Daily the mock prince was received with elaborate ceremonial borrowed by Tom from his romantic readings. Daily the great affairs of the mimic kingdom were discussed. Just double checking to make sure we're still reading. Okay, here we go. So discussed with the royal council, and his daily mimic highness issued decrees to his imaginary armies, knaves, and viceroys. After which he would go forth in his rags and beg a few farthings, eat his poor crust, take his customary cuffs and abuse, and then stretch himself upon his handful of foul straw and resume his empty grandeurs in his dreams. And still his desire to look just once upon a real prince in the flesh grew upon him day by day, week by week, until at last it absorbed all other desires and became the one passion in his life. One January day, on his usual begging tour, he trampled dependently up and down the region round about Mincing Lane in Little East Cheap, hour after hour, barefooted and cold, looking at a cook shop windows and longing for the dreadful pork pies and other deadly inventions displayed there. For him, these were dainties fit for angels, that is, judging by the smell they were, for it had never been his good luck to own and eat one. There was a cold drizzle of rain, the atmosphere was murky, and it was a melancholy day. At night Tom reached home so wet and tired and hungry that it was not possible for his father and grandmother to observe his forlorn condition and not be moved after their fashion. Whereafter they gave him a brisk cuffing at once, sent him to bed. For a long time his pain and hunger were the swearing and fighting going on in the building kept him awake, but at last his thoughts drifted away far away, romantic lands, and he fell asleep in the company of jeweled and gilded princelings who lived in their vast palaces and had servants salaaming before them and flying to execute their orders. And then, as usual, he dreamed that he was a princeling himself. All night long, the glories of his royal estates shone upon him. He moved among great lords and ladies in a blaze of light, breathing perfumes, drinking in delicious music, and answering the reverent obscenities of the reverent absences of the glittering throng as it is parted to make way for him, and with here a smile and a nod of his princely head. And when he woke in the morning and looked upon the wretchedness around him, his dream had had its usual effect, and had intensified the sordidness of his surroundings, and surroundings a thousandfold. And then came bitterness, heartbreak, and tears. And that's the end of chapter 2. So thank you so much for joining me for The Prince and the Pauper. First 2 chapters by Mark Twain. Thank you so much. Check back in for episode 5. I have a wonderful another surprise for you. I have so many surprises planned. So thank you. Tune in again and have a beautiful day.